Good afternoon, and thank you for your attendance and participation in today's town hall focused on our country's cultural climate and the racial injustices unfolding across our nation. In the past few weeks, the world has witnessed, yet again, the deaths of multiple African American men and women at the hands of systemic oppression and racism. Today would have been Breonna Taylor, a Louisville, Kentucky Black woman's 27th birthday. Just 2 months ago, her life was cut short when police officers entered her apartment in plain clothes with a no-knock warrant and exchanged gunfire with her boyfriend. This left her dead with 8 gunshot wounds and the police without any evidence of drugs. We watched on social media as viral footage of Ahmaud Arbery, a Black man jogging in Georgia, was followed and gunned down in the middle of the street. Again, we watched footage close to home here in Washtenaw County, a deputy repeatedly punching Shatana Grady L., a Black woman, in the head during an arrest. Occurring on the same day, a few states away in our country, in Minnesota, we witnessed George Floyd, another Black man, struggle to breathe for 8 minutes and 46 seconds under the knee of a police officer, ultimately leading to his unnecessary death. Michigan medicine will not stand silent as racial disparities and injustices unfold in our country. We are dedicated to sustainable change. Today, you will hear from our leadership, Dr. Marshall Runge, Tony Denton, and Dee Hunt, as well as other impactful voices on what actions we will need to take. I am also joined in the room today with our executive leaders, including David Spollinger, Carol Bradford, Steve Kunkel, and Nancy May. Together, with input from our faculty, staff, learners, and community, we will continue to move the needle forward toward a more equitable health system and stand against racism. Now I'd like to invite to the podium Reverend Tony Marshall.
Thank you. As we enter our program today and share our sacred stories, let us pause for a moment of silence and recognizing all those that are suffering, marginalized, and have no voice. Thank you. We commit this time unto our God and hope that our efforts today would help to bring about a solution to the pain and suffering in our world. At this time, we're calling to the podium Dr. Marshall Runge.
Thank you, and thank all of you for tuning in today. It is extraordinarily sad and indeed heartbreaking that we are still seeing such terrible acts of discrimination and violence. It's infuriating and frustrating that Black people, brown people, and people of all colors across our country are not treated with respect and dignity, and they're not treated fairly. It is truly unthinkable that people are dying for no reason at all, except for being who they are. These recent episodes and displays of racism must halt. They must be a call to all of us to bring us together to continue having critical discussions about equity, about humanity, and the values that define who we are and what we will tolerate in our communities. As difficult as this may be, I believe that discussions like this, like the one we're having today, are paramount in finding our way to a more inclusive and equitable climate. I won't pretend to have any idea what people of color and all marginalized populations experience on a daily basis. I've never had to experience anything similar. And I may not even fully understand the implications of what will be shared with me and with us today. The only way, however, that I can raise my cultural awareness, expand my perspective, and deepen my empathy is to listen to the experiences of others and to learn from them. As an academic institution, continuous learning and discovery is fundamental to our core. There is no time more demanding than right now for us to lean on this core value and increase our awareness and understanding of systemic racism, unconscious bias, and how we all can be allies. That's why today we've invited members of our Michigan medicine community to share their stories so that we can learn from them and we can have a better understanding of the world from their lens. If there's anything that you take from today's discussion, I hope it will be that we all must be accountable. We all must take responsibility for what is within our sphere of influence, but also far beyond our own walls. It may be a show of compassion, a bystander intervention, an acknowledgement of our own prejudices, or any of the many ways we can be involved. Whatever we do, it must be something we commit to and stand by every single day. Now I would like to call to the podium Dee Hunt, who's our Chief Human Resources Officer.
Thank you, Marshall. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my sister's keeper? The answer is yes, I am. Each and every one of us deserves an opportunity to live in peace, be respected, receive justice, and be held accountable for our actions. Since March of this year, we have lived through an aggressive new challenge in the form of COVID-19. And the community of Michigan Medicine stood together to fight the virus. Through countless acts of compassion, dedication, and respect for human dignity, we displayed what we're capable of accomplishing. Today, we come together to address a powerful, much older challenge, a crisis of civil unrest in America. In addressing this challenge, we must continue to stand together as we face the change that is needed in our country, in our state, and at Michigan Medicine. We must demonstrate fairness in our decision-making, our support for all our Michigan Medicine family. We will soon hear from several individuals that represents various areas of Michigan Medicine. As we listen to their testimonies, we need to ask ourselves, what can we do to bring about the change many of us have been waiting for decades? I was born and raised and educated in Detroit, Michigan. I've lived through years of racial injustice and change and understand that these issues are not easily resolved, but together we can make change. How do we continue the journey of walking side by side for justice, for peace, and equality for all? How do we as a people let brotherly love continue and stop the madness so we do not have to relive what we witnessed on May 25th in Minneapolis, Minnesota? To start, we all just need to breathe and then act and make change happen. Thank you. I would like to start by introducing our first speaker for today. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to share their story as it relates to racial injustice and inequalities. And our first presenter for the day will be a Michigan Medicine medical student. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of each of you today. And more so, I appreciate the privilege of representing my medical student colleagues in this space. I actually asked not to be introduced by name because I didn't want you to focus your attention on me, on my name, on the sound of my voice, on my identity, on my experiences, because that attention would be misdirected, because this is not about me. This is about our entire community that's now faced with recognizing and validating the experiences, the identities, and the voices of the marginalized learners, soon to be leaders, right here within Michigan Medicine. So to do so, I have 2 main goals today in the short time that I have to speak with you. Let's talk about the first. The first is that I want to act as a channel through which the stories of my colleagues who've experienced microaggressions, bias, discrimination, and yes, unfortunately, racism right here within Michigan Medicine can flow. To do so, I look at a racial climate survey that had been conducted on the medical students here in Michigan Medicine, but I couldn't find one. So I made one. And I polled a sample of medical students who identified as racial and ethnic minorities. And I asked them about the incidents that they had experienced that they associated were racially motivated. Most notably, these experiences tended to happen most commonly in the clinical space. And 41.5% of these experiences happened either occasionally or often. I took it one step further and asked them to elaborate on these incidents. I then, using a narrative-based approach, classified the anecdotes of these into 3 themes, which can be considered the 3 tiers of racism that were outlined by Dr. Kamara Phyllis Jones. She is an African-American woman, family physician, social epidemiologist, and former director for the social determinants of health at the CDC. Looking at this, I asked the students about the 3 classifications of racism they experienced. The first you can consider institutionalized, meaning access to goods, services, and opportunities. Access to power and representation, or inaction in the face of need. One anecdote that a student conveyed to me that aligned with this theme sounds like this. I was working in the OR with a fellow and an attending all day. The fellow said a joke that was racist. The attending laughed, almost uncomfortably, and then the conversation moved forward. I wanted to say something. I felt like I had to say something, but I didn't. And I felt ashamed about that. Thinking to myself, maybe it's because I was a medical student and I didn't want to make a wave. Reflecting later on, maybe it's because I was a non-white woman in a room full of only white men. If you ask yourself, why didn't my colleague just report this incident? In the survey that I conducted to my peers, 61.5% of them who had experienced an incident associated with race indicated they'd never reported it. When asked why, almost universally, they indicated it was either fear of 1, repercussion, or 2, fear of inaction. The second type of racism identified by Dr. Phyllis Jones is called personally mediated, which you can think about as the different motives and intentions that are ascribed to a population. In this context, they work in 2 different ways. Here at Michigan Medicine, you can think about 1 being directed against a patient. One colleague indicated this incident. I was working in a clinic with an attending and seeing an African-American patient, to which after leaving the clinic, the attending made a comment that this patient who came in for a non-urgent but pain-related concern was likely there because they were addicted to a substance and they were just drug seeking, as most Blacks who that attending had seen in the past. As a minority student who had heard this narrative over and over, my colleague thought, maybe this is actually true about this population. The second type of personally mediated form of racism that my colleagues experience can be considered directed against self. In this context, you can think about it as a microaggression. One brilliant colleague of mine very poignantly described a microaggression as an experience associated with a salient identity, that you almost have to take a step back before you describe it. Take a breath, because you anticipate who you're going to be speaking with won't believe you, and they won't believe this experience was tied to your identity. When does this happen here? A colleague of mine conveyed a story. When performing a physical exam on a patient, the patient asked, "Are you going to be able to perform that exam with that thing on your head?" That thing that the patient was referring to was my colleague's hijab, or their Islamic headscarf. The third type of racism identified by Dr. Phyllis Jones is called internalized. This is a form of racism in which someone finally accepts the negative messages, attitudes, beliefs, their intrinsic worth, and their full limitations as to who they are and their full humanity. So if you think right now, how is what's going on outside affecting the students in here? Consider this anecdote. A colleague reflected that every time she sees a Black body that's brutalized or traumatized in the name of race, she's left to think that that body must not matter to that person who took their life or brutalized them. But when she's here in Michigan Medicine and she is stigmatized, isolated, made to feel incompetent because of her race, she feels like she doesn't matter. So let's talk about the second goal. The second goal is very simple, but it's not easy. My colleagues are imploring us to include students as shareholders in the decision-making of this school regarding racial climate and inclusion. There's a whole list of student initiatives that have been rolled out as far as today and will continue to proceed in the next coming days. I encourage you to consider them. My final statement for you all is that I hope you don't take my presence here as a chastisement of what Michigan Medicine did not do yesterday, but a choice of what Michigan Medicine can do today and in the future. Ultimately, my marginalized colleagues, learners, soon-to-be leaders right here within Michigan Medicine have been echoing the phrase, "I can't breathe," for a very long time. How many more instances do we have to bear witness to before we finally hear us, see us, and believe us? Thank you so much for this time. Take care.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Erica Newman.
I am here because injustice is here. In an open letter from the Birmingham jail, where he was imprisoned as a participant in nonviolent demonstrations against segregation, on April 16th in 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in longhand the letter, which included the following: "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well-timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. The wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing thalidomide, reliving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see with the distinguished jurists of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-lag speed toward the goal of political independence, and we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at the lunch counter. I guess it is easy for those that never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, and when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and brutalize, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering, as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that has just been announced on television, and see tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to her colored children, and see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son asking in agonizing pathos, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes Negro and your middle name becomes boy and your last name becomes John. And when your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs. And when you are harrowed by day and night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly at tiptoe stands, never knowing what to expect next, and plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runneth over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice when they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidance impatience. My name is Erica Newman. I'm a pediatric surgeon. I'm also the vice chair of faculty development at Michigan Medicine. My brothers and sisters, we are running out of time. We are at a tipping point. We must act now to shift the paradigm of injustice. It is time for drastic change. As doctors and healthcare providers, we take an oath to treat all patients equally, yet all patients are not equally well. Poverty, poor health, diseases, these all spread along lines of marginalization and race, accounting for what medical anthropologists have termed structural violence. It is structural because inequities are embedded in our economic organization of our social world, often in ways that are invisible to those with power and privilege. It is violence because the killing of an unarmed Black man by police or in police custody and the extrajudicial killing of Black people by police and vigilantes, and the shocking prevalence of poverty with 3 in 5 children in inner cities such as Detroit living in poverty. These problems are our problems. The people are our people. As doctors and surgeons, we can no longer turn a blind eye to social justice. Society gives our voices great strength and credibility. It is time to forge forward as the leaders and best. We do not settle. We push relentlessly for quality and preeminence in all that we do. So today, I would like to ring the alarm at Michigan Medicine. I propose 3 ways that we commit to this. We all become relentless allies. Racism and violence directed against Black and brown people, or indeed any member of society, impacts us all. The structural violence that disproportionately affects people of color and those living below the poverty line is a public health crisis. It is our responsibility as physicians and healthcare providers. We must condemn racism and discrimination when we see it and not go quiet. It is not enough for us to abstain from racism ourselves while allowing it to take place all around us. Secondly, educate ourselves on the differences between being a racist, a non-racist, and an anti-racist. There is no in-between. We are either racist or anti-racist. Lastly, I challenge us, Michigan Medicine, to build the biggest, most successful medical pipeline for children of color in America. We have the structure, the background, the experience to rise up children in the state of Michigan and in America, children of color, and prepare them to become doctors and nurses and healthcare providers. We can do this here within the walls of Michigan Medicine. We should no longer watch social justice from the sideline. It is time for us to rise up.
Thank you, Dr. Newman. Our next speaker is Steve Finson.
Thank you, Dee. I'm honored to be able to share in this space today as we discuss the current climate within our Michigan medicine community. As we've heard, COVID-19 is impacting minority communities at a disproportionate rate because of systemic racism. And while COVID-19 has devastatingly impacted everyone's lives, Black and brown folks are also battling with police brutality, vigilantism, and the weaponizing of our racial identity. There's quite a bit of talk about vicarious racism these days. You don't have to be the victim to be harmed. And research shows that regardless of color, a person exposed to racism has a negative impact on them. And we've seen it here. After the critical incident at the hospital last year, I participated in conversations with 200 faculty and staff and reported their experiences at Michigan Medicine. I heard dozens of painful stories about folks being marginalized because of race or position, and sometimes both. And that has an impact on all of us. Now, my heart hurts for everyone at this organization right now as we travel these dangerous seas. But this is our opportunity. As Shakespeare once wrote, to take this tide at the flood. So while we're navigating and morphing into our new selves, I have hope that we will realize the fortunes of our DEI ideals and principles. Amy Cooper, the woman from Central Park, uttered the infamous and all too common words, "But I'm not a racist," in defense of her actions. Well, prove it. Because to me, the opposite of racist is anti-racist. So that should be the question we're really asking all of ourselves. What am I doing to be anti-racist? I want that to be the Michigan Medicine way. Anti-racism should flow through our veins. We cannot be the organization that says, but that's not us. We fight for justice for all. Yet year after year after year, very little changes. Michigan Medicine has invested heavily in being a high reliability organization, and I support that 100%. But it can't just be HRO related to systems and procedures. We have to be an HRO for our faculty, for our learners, for our staff, and for our patients. We're talking about the safety and the well-being of our colleagues, people, and those we pledge to care for. We have to be better. And while there are many opportunities, I just want to share a couple. Number one, don't put the entire burden of discussing institutional racism on folks of color and DEI folks. As Rob Seller so eloquently stated, we're tired. Be an ally, be present, be vocal, and be uncomfortable. Number two, acknowledge privilege. You don't have to apologize for it, but have the conscious awareness to recognize your privilege and think about how you can utilize it to help eliminate inequities by engaging those who historically haven't been included. And number three, model anti-racist behaviors with our younger generations. Our children, our grandchildren will be much better equipped to foster an egalitarian society, but we have to establish that foundation. I reached out to a Black colleague of mine last night. I don't know him that well, quite frankly, but I've seen racism directed at him within our walls here. I hadn't talked to him in a while, so I just wanted to check in and ask if he'd like to help me with a bias policy that I'm working on. And then he shared that he recently lost his mother to COVID and that he was holding his family together, but that he loved to help. In the midst of losing the matriarch of his family, brutal Black discrimination in our country, and experiencing racism right here, he still wanted to help our organization. That blew my mind, and it brought me to tears. So if you're listening at home, my brother, thank you, and know that I stand with you and your family in support and love. And I just want to close with a quote from Star Hawk. She's an activist and an author. She says, solidarity is based on the principle that we are willing to put ourselves at risk to protect each other. And we're seeing the power of that unity across our country right now, and in fact, globally. Now, I love the University of Michigan, and I always will. I went to undergrad here, I went to graduate school here, And this is where I've spent my entire professional career. I'm so proud that we're the leaders and best in academics, in sports, and in medicine. But if we want to be the leaders and best in this DEI space, my friends, we have to embrace solidarity. Everyone here has to help tear down the debilitating structures that exist, hold each other accountable, and be willing to make sacrifices for everyone else here. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next, via video, we have Dana Habers.
Thank you for the invitation to be here with you. This is uncomfortable. In preparing what to say, I've fretted over the possibility of using the wrong word choice or offending someone. But I would rather be the person who talks than not, for fear of offending. I hope to be open enough that if I say something wrong, I'm okay being called out and will learn from it. I am hopeful that my discomfort is also a sign of transformation, of muscles building, of progress. The start of what we need to eradicate this shadow lingering way too long over our country. Discomfort is a sign that we are touching a nerve, getting to the core of what it is we are supposed to be doing in all of this. I lead in a department where in 2018, our climate survey revealed that 50% of our team didn't have confidence in our DE&I efforts. Seeing that feedback shocked, appalled, and embarrassed me. And this response, I think, is the key to our better future. We're going through a major transition. We're working with immediacy on our pipeline. We're setting new expectations. We're improving because we are not avoiding the conversation or going about life as though racism could not possibly happen on our watch. We very much acknowledge that it is. Racism, you see, is not just about open hatred. Hate is one manifestation, but racism is really a series of systems designed specifically to advance people who look like me and leave behind those who don't. It is a structured and absolutely intentional means to make it harder for people of color to achieve what I can with less effort. And the only way we will ever achieve true equality is if I am willing to give up that head start, willing to give up my privilege. What I've learned in my now 17 or so years in academic medicine, even in the context of being a female executive in boardrooms dominated by men who have literally told me to just sit there and look pretty, is that discrimination is absolutely happening on my watch. And for it not to, I have to act. I have to intend otherwise and undo these systems which may serve as my trampoline. I am also the mother of 3 Caucasian males. Every moment of every day, I carry the responsibility to teach them not only to acknowledge their privilege, but even more importantly, understand why it is their own mother's goal for them to give it up. While our country's history of oppression is not something they are personally responsible for inflicting, it is something they are personally responsible for dismantling. I and they will not relax into privilege, will not turn off the news for a break because our African American friends don't get that luxury. Those of you who know me know I also really like to have a plan, so I wanted to quickly share 3 things I think we should all do. First, read and learn. We're an academic institution. Education is in our bones. It's a little shout out to radiology there. Read history, read blogs, read opinions from all perspectives, read, and commit to listening to people around us whose experience is different than our own. Second, identify and change these systems. They exist all around us. Many are on autopilot without our even realizing it, especially if that system is designed to benefit us. We can act by thinking, will this policy or process or decision or norm disproportionately impact underrepresented minorities? If the answer is even a possibly, we must speak up and raise the issue to make change. Vote in every election. While many of us tend to focus on the presidency, it is actually our state and local level elections that drive reforming police departments and the criminal justice system. So learn which candidates make this a priority and vote. It absolutely matters. Finally, and third, continue to model the highest ethical code. While I do not believe violence solves this problem, acts of activism and protest, even kneeling, are a call for awareness and change and deserve to be heard. Dr. Brown's discussion of recent events are heart-wrenching and awful. But there is danger too in the less obvious, in the less extreme day-to-day comment or interaction where racism pops up. And when this happens, we must keep having this conversation. We must not stand by or brush it off or carry on with our day. We say something. Thank you for listening, and please look after yourself and out for each other.
Thank you, Dana. Next speaker is Kathy Kendricks.
Good afternoon. The first thing I'd like to acknowledge is just the privilege of being asked to stand in this space. Then I'm going to acknowledge the humbleness of being asked to stand in this space and to speak after the voices that have already spoken in this space. That is a privilege that I will not forget for a long time, because the generation that I'll speak from is one where some of this behavior that we were talking about, we normalized it. And we normalized it for a reason, not because we believed that it was just, because we needed to survive. And I'll say once again, I was asked to speak, but that has been the norm in my career in nursing at Michigan Medicine. To be one of the only, to be the one, and to be chosen to represent the voice of many. Sometimes that can be okay, but when we accept that, and I can sit in a room as a nurse leader, and I'm the Associate Chief Nursing Officer for Cardiovascular Services, and I'm one of 4 Associate Chief Nursing Officers in the Department of Nursing. But when I can sit in a room for my entire career, and I can count the number of people that look like me, that's a problem. And I could be proud, and I could be haughty, and I could be really satisfied that my voice is the voice that people believe should be heard. And I could see that as a privilege and an honor, but today I'm gonna take a different road, and I'm gonna take a different path, not so much just based solely on what I believe to be true, but I have 3 African-American children that I've raised, and I raised them under a set of principles, and one of them was defined by Dee Hunt when she said, am I my brother's keeper? And my 3 children were always taught to respond, yes, I am. And we never define brother by color, not by gender, not by sexual orientation. We define brother by what my parents taught us, that as a child of God, you are my brother. And if I cannot love my brother who I see every day, how can I worship and love a God that I cannot see? I raised my kids like that, but I have a 40-year-old who frantically picked up the phone on Sunday, and he said, Mom, I can't come to your house to help you today. I know I'm supposed to help you. You're back. You still can't lift, and I'm supposed to help you, but I can't figure out a route to get to you anymore. And I said, Patrick, what are you talking about? He said, they told us to stay home, stay out of the suburbs because we are not going to be safe. So I can't come to help you. And he's 40, and he's afraid to move around. At that point, I said to myself as a mother, have I done the right thing to raise kids that thought something was true that we can't live? As a professional in the Department of Nursing, we have a long way to go because I still see us being satisfied that there's only 1 or 2 of us in a room that represents nursing leadership at the executive level, at the middle level, and at the local level. I've spent my whole career here, and I've been called the N-word vocally. I've complained. I've been called less Black than other Black people, so they don't know why I would be offended by that, because it can't be true because I'm not as Black as other people. What does that mean, right? But it was said to me, and I should have been proud of that. And it happens every day. So our nursing community, I had a phone call at about 10 o'clock last night from someone who tends not to talk, and she said, nursing has been silent. Where's the voice of nursing leadership? And when will you all talk about the racism that we experience every day as we provide care to people that don't treat us as we are human? And when I walk in the room with a white person, there's always the assumption that I'm the tech or I'm the lesser and not the professional. And I have to identify myself of that to be accepted. When will nursing speak out so that everyone understands that nursing too has experienced this and we have a voice? And I would like to say just one last thing, and I know I saw my time coming to an end, but in the words of Dr. King, he said, and he talked about change. He said, in order to change, you just need to make the first step and not have to visualize the entire staircase. So I would encourage all of us, and especially in the Department of Nursing, let's stop talking about it and let's start doing about it. And let's make the first step, because the rest of it, people will follow us if we lead. We've allowed silence to lead. In our nursing community, they're looking for a voice of change and not just one that is spoken by the physician providers or the academic side. It's time for nursing to speak up and to allow nursing to have a voice and a direction. So that's the only reason I agreed to do this today. So I would hope that anything that I've said will help someone understand where we are and where we need to go. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kathy. Our next speaker is Terrence Pleasant.
Good afternoon. My name is Terrence Pleasant, and I am a fourth-year resident in the Department of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery. I am also a Black son, a Black husband, a Black father, and a Black doctor. Broken, disheartened, distraught, afraid. Because just a few days ago, I watched a clip, like so many of you, where an African-American male, just like myself, was senselessly killed by the same people we entrust to protect us. I am afraid for my life, my Black son's life, and the lives of my fellow Black sisters and brothers who are at risk of falling victim to the racial mistreatment in this country. There's a saying that goes, quote, "We fear what we don't understand," end quote. I want to take the opportunity to help you all to understand me as a Black man. I want to give you a quick glimpse into my upbringing and my experiences. I am a Black man who was born and raised in a single-parent household in the southeast quadrant of Washington, D.C., an area where poverty and violence are pervasive. Fortunately for me, though, my childhood was not the stereotypical narrative of an inner-city youth in that region of the city. My home was a fortress of big dreams. My mother encouraged me to aspire to become anything I wanted to be. "Don't be afraid. The world is yours," she would say. I braved the tough streets of DC and made it to Maine, the second whitest state in the Union, to attend Bowdoin College for my undergraduate studies. After completing my Bachelor's of Arts degree in neuroscience, I returned to DC to work for several years for the National Institute of Health. I subsequently attended medical school at Georgetown University School of Medicine. Congrats, you've done it. You've made it to medical school. You've beat the odds, Terrence Pleasant. Pride is the best way to describe that feeling as a Black medical student who overcame adversity is now wearing a white coat. Only until a white woman approaches me on the medical school campus and immediately, without hesitation, hands me her keys and instructs me to park her car. I pause, wondering what it is about my attire, my white coat, my bow tie, my freshly pressed shirt and slacks, my stethoscope domed around my neck that has somehow created confusion about what I could possibly be. However, it had nothing to do with my attire, but I felt rather my skin color. That for her created no ambiguity about the possibilities of what I could achieve with my life. I graduated from medical school and matched here into otolaryngology. Maybe I had escaped racism as I continued down my journey of academic and clinical advancement. Maybe I had surmounted racism through excellence. Until one day I was working in the University of Michigan Surgical ICU as an intern my first month and was walking down the hall in a group with my other non-Black colleagues. Again, wearing my long white coat, stethoscope, scrubs, and hospital ID badge, I noticed I was being watched by a hospital clerk. When I asked if there was anything I could help her with, she responded, "No, you look suspicious." Suspicious? Enraged but calm, I responded, "Is it because I'm a Black man wearing a white coat?" I share my story with you today, not to receive accolades or pity, but to point out that racism is just not in the form of a police officer's knee on a Black man's neck. At every step of my journey, I've been degraded or found offensive by the color of my skin, regardless of my attire, my degrees, or my accomplishments. Sure, I have overcome some of the odds in an attempt to be a productive member of society, but I remain afraid that I could end up as a statistic, that I could be the 1 in 1,000 Black man in America that will die at the hands of police, 2.5 times more likely than my white male counterparts to die during an encounter with the police. My fear was initially limited to, quote, driving while Black and anticipating a potentially negative encounter with police. But now I find that even at work, I'm at risk of being seen as a threat. You may ask, what can be done? Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet to take down racism in America. I don't have the answer to this country's at least 400-year history of physical and figurative enslavement and oppression of Black people. However, I want to challenge every one of you in this room and listening virtually. Think about what you fear and make an effort to understand. Fear is the etiology of the violence we see, both physical, verbal, and institutional. Understanding is what counteracts this. I would challenge all of you to make an effort to learn more about the Black experience. Listen to Black people, speak about their experiences, and think about your actions and how they may impact them. Furthermore, be intentional about teaching your children and your grandchildren not to fear Black people. Ensure that they grow up in an environment where they just not accept, but learn from and about Black people. I believe this is the first small step each of us can do to make this world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Next, we have Terrence. Next, we have Dr. Justin Dimmitt.
Good afternoon. First, I just want to thank you for the tremendous privilege of sharing the stage with these incredible leaders that we've seen here today. I'm going to start by talking about my privilege. 1 year ago, we came together for a town hall, much as we have today, to discuss a reprehensible act of racism and hate here in our workplace. I attended. During the open mic part of the session, a faculty member, I now know her to be Dr. Christina Chapman from Radiation Oncology, shared this quote: "As a Black woman, the hardest thing about these recurring acts of racial violence is that I sit at home and cry, and then come to work, and everyone is acting like nothing happened." Listening to this, I felt intense shame. I was complicit in this. At that moment, I understood what it means to have privilege as a white man, to watch the news, and then set these horrors aside to go about my work productively. Now, when I see these events unfold, as we have in the last couple weeks, and pretty much at a steady beat all the time, I immediately think about her story. While we are all watching these events, and many of us are outraged, the burden does not fall equally. Not all of us fear for our own lives or those of our parents, siblings, or children.
On a department town hall this past Monday, Glenn Wacom, one of our fifth-year general surgery residents, a graduate of Princeton and UCSF Medical School, told us that when he is sitting on his couch in shorts and a hoodie, and he decides he wants to buy ice cream, he has to go change his clothes before going out because of fear. In my nearly 5 decades of life, I have never once had that thought. To quote one of our second-year general surgery residents, Sidra Bonner, racism is a system, not an event. We hold these types of events, like this town hall, as a response to an event. I have learned from Sidra and Glenn and others, many others, that you cannot fight a system with events. You need a counter system, a set of policies, procedures, and a culture that truly supports inclusion. That means action. This type of intentional countermeasure is what we need to build here at Michigan Medicine. What does that mean? That means intentionally deconstructing and reconstructing every policy, process, and procedure according to anti-racist principles and the notion of being an ally and an accomplice. If you do not know what anti-racist, ally, or accomplice means, then you, like I, need to learn. And I've heard very clearly from our Black and minority residents in my department and others around the country that you should not ask them to educate you. Not until you have at least read and studied widely as they have. We are working hard in the Department of Surgery, a department of which I am the chair, to begin to educate ourselves. We are doing this because we have believed that diversity drives excellence, and also that we need to take responsibility for our role in moving the culture of American surgery from one of hierarchy and exclusion to one of inclusion. We began by asking ourselves some tough questions. We asked ourselves, do we have equitable recruitment of residents, faculty, and staff? We found ourselves lacking. We therefore formed a representative diverse department recruitment committee chaired by Dr. Newman, who you met earlier, that deploys best practices in cultivating a diverse applicant pool, trains members in implicit and explicit bias, and uses objective evaluation criteria. But we need to do more. We asked ourselves, do we regularly have a forum to discuss bias and racism? We found ourselves lacking. So we launched a Cultural Complications Conference to discuss cases of behavior that do not live up to our desired standards. But we need to do more. We asked ourselves, do we ensure equal access to mentorship and sponsorship in our department? We found ourselves lacking. So we implemented launch teams for residents, junior faculty, and boost teams for mid-career faculty. But we need to do more. We asked ourselves, do we pay attention to the visual messages in our spaces? We found ourselves lacking once again. Our walls speak loudly, and they often say, you do not belong here. We began creating new imagery that reflects and showcases all aspects of diversity in our department. But we need to do so much more. These initiatives collectively we call the Michigan Promise. The promise that if you come here to Michigan, no matter what you look like or what your interests are, we will ensure that you fulfill your potential. I do have some hope that the little work that we have done, this beginning of a journey, is having some effect. This year, we have as many Black women as we do white men in our incoming class of general surgery interns, as many Black women as white men. While I'm hopeful, I am also very much afraid. I'm afraid that I will fail to provide these interns the supportive environment that they deserve. I'm afraid I will not fulfill my promise, this Michigan Promise. So for all the leaders in this organization, most of whom look like me, if you ask yourselves these questions above, would you find yourselves lacking as we have? If so, let us take action together and let us build a future together where we all can keep our promises. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dimmitt. Thank you to all our speakers. Our medical student, Kathy Kendricks, our Associate Chief in CNO, Dr. Erica Newman, Steve Vinson from faculty and also DEI lead, Dana Habers, who was on the call, our Chief Department Administrator, as well as Dr. Terrence Pleasant, our House Officer, and again, Dr. Dimmitt. Thank you all for sharing your testimony, sharing your story, and sharing your recommendations, as well as putting forth the challenge to Michigan Medicine for us to move forward together. Next, I would like to introduce Tony Denton, our Chief Operating Officer. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee. I want to express a huge gratitude to all the speakers who have stepped out to speak up against racial discrimination with aspirations for positive light and a path forward and a path away from systemic abuse, fear, anger, sadness, and disillusionment. I resonate with so many of the stories and have my own, having poured out too many tears over the past few weeks, including conversations with my 23-year-old son, grateful each day when I come home safely. I appreciate so many of you who have engaged in a dialogue with me recently and reached out with supportive comments and inquiry on how I am feeling, how I am thinking about all of this as an African-American man and leader within this organization and community. As Dr. Runge pointed out at the beginning, storytelling is an important step on our journey. These stories are about vulnerability, a tapestry of feelings and emotions, long-held perspectives about what is right, what is wrong, a sharing of our authentic selves during troubling and crisis times, which we are in. Yes, we are at a crossroads, an unbelievable crossroad, but one where we still have choices on which path to take. Here at Michigan Medicine, these times, which are our times, are aimed at first listening for acknowledgement, embracing our collective community need to rely upon each other and not let anyone stand in our way towards achieving and sustaining principles and values of fairness, respect, diversity, equity, compassion, and team. Together as a team, we must strive to be better, to set clear examples that ground us in a culture that improves each minute, each hour, and each day. As a team, I encourage all of us to think about this as one day at a time with a focus and sheer determination to make us better, to remind all through example what created equal and life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness really means. 2 days ago, a survey with 2 questions regarding racial discrimination and social unrest was sent out across Michigan Medicine. I want to share results with you that continue to tell the story of how people are feeling across the organization, followed by their thematic suggestions of what Michigan Medicine should consider to take action on for the betterment of our entire organization, where each and every one of us is invited to be part of a new roadmap of solutions. Question number 1, what are you feeling now? 1,005 people participated in the survey. 35% are sad, 20% are angry, 17% are fearful, 11% are frustrated, 7% are just plain tired, fatigued, 4% are hopeful for a new day, and 7% had a number of different responses. No surprises there, a tapestry of feelings and emotions, but it's part of the acknowledgement of what we are doing, what we are thinking, and where we need to go from here. The second question, what actions can we take as an institution, department, unit, or leaders? There are 5 most prevalent themes, and I will go through them fairly quickly because there's action to be taken. Speak up and show solidarity through global statements, demonstration, zero tolerance policies for racism, but to sustain those. Number 2, opportunities for conversations in a safe space to discuss issues, providing the time and space to discuss those issues, allow all voices to be heard, provide resources for leaders to facilitate meaningful, crucial conversations. Education and training, providing educational resources on racism and mandatory DEI training for all, an initiative that started several years ago, but we clearly have more work to do. Number 4, diversify the workforce, providing recruitment materials, strengthening pipelines, examining promotion practices, providing career support, making efforts to diversify our leadership. Lots of examples, lots of comments underlie these themes, and I'm sure that these will be shared with you. Number 5, work with all the communities that we serve, addressing health disparities and showing how we value our diverse communities all around us, locally and regionally. So I want to say thank you to all who participated in the survey, because I acknowledge your feelings, your thoughts, and your ideas, all of which are positive steps, which we should continue to pursue one day at a time. I'd like to turn the mic and the podium over to Dr. Marshall Runge.
Thank you, Tony. I especially want to thank all of our speakers today who shared their poignant and so meaningful stories and gave us their unique insights and perspective. It takes courage to be open and transparent about your own personal experiences, both good and bad. I know all of us truly appreciate their doing so. In addition to the feedback that Tony just talked about collected in the survey, we want to continue hearing from you. It's critically important that we continue the conversation about race, diversity, and our climate here at Michigan Medicine. I will ask that our Office of Health Equity and Inclusion convene a work team to do a deeper dive in the survey results and to guide us in our priorities. What we learn from the survey and other means of feedback will help this work team develop a plan around what contributions we can and must make to eliminate the racism and inequities that exist today. I would also encourage all of you to share your own stories. These stories have great impact and value as we expand our way of thinking around these most difficult issues. The Office of Health, Equity, and Inclusion will work with communications to provide ways to contribute your unique experiences to the overall conversation. And finally, I want to say on behalf of our leadership team who are present in this auditorium or virtually, we commit to having future and ongoing discussions about racism and discrimination in town halls, develop and implement a plan. We commit to taking action. We commit to implementing the changes recommended by our work group and others at Michigan Medicine. I don't know exactly what these actions will look like, but my leadership and I completely embrace the understanding that if we are to affect change, we need to keep these conversations open, and we may need to make difficult decisions and conversations be a reality as we go forward. Thank you all for your participation and your engagement today. We look forward to, we all look forward to working together, arms locked, as we face this terrible terrible series of events, and we try to become the solution. Thank you.